The Front Row Back Row podcast is a show where two grad school buddies discuss physical therapy entrepreneurship. I helped guide a company to an 8-figure exit, and I'm now starting my own mobile company. Brian grew his mobile practice to 4 clinics, and he's now doing $1 million in revenue. Join us as we help you grow your own business. Hello and welcome to the Front Row Back Row podcast. My name is Dr. Owen Campbell, and with me as always is Dr. Brian Wolf. And today we have a special guest, Dr. Jeremy Bettle. He is a PhD in human performance, and he is the co-founder of Vitality Performance. And I know Brian, you and Jeremy work really, really well together. Really well. I don't know if you guys work well together, but you work a lot together.
Yeah.
So I'll let you do a little bit more introduction on him. And just for our listeners to know, it's going to quickly go from Jeremy to Jez. So introduce Jez, tell us about him, man. And Jez, welcome, man.
Owen, thank you.
Awesome.
Hey, guys, can I just jump in and say it's Vitality Collective, not Vitality Performance?
My fault.
You already messed it up.
We had a 2-minute conversation about it, and I screwed the one thing I was supposed to do up. This is good. We're starting great.
Jez, to give you a quick concept from Owen too. For whatever reason, Owen can't do reads. It's like one of these hilarious. It's like become an ongoing hysterical thing.
Yeah.
To the point where we've just ditched them all together. So any plug that gets on from Owen in general, like you can't have a reading from a script. He wrote it down. He still screws it up. It's just like amazing.
I'm the
so
same.
that's just there you go. Exactly. So Vitality Collective. Jez, obviously I've known you for a while now. Know Michelle. So it's always great to talk to you. And so this is fun because I think it's one of the things where obviously a lot of what we talk about is S&C work, but how Jez and I met was through New York City Football Club, right? And so from this perspective in pro sport, what I wanted to do today was just talk a lot about, I think the biggest thing that I get from physical therapists in particular, and I bet that you get it too. I wonder how much more of it in the S&C world, but people always ask me like, one, how do I get into pro sports? People ask me all the time, right? And they don't like my answers. They don't like the answer of be the best physical therapist ever, which is like not the answer. The answer is just like, be fun, man. Be cool. Like if you're like I'd much rather pick a person that I know is a good physical therapist that I give a beer with than a better physical therapist than that person that sucks, right? So it's like people 100%. Don't love that answer, but right, exactly. So I want to talk a little bit about like that stuff. Obviously, the integration of physical therapy, athletic training, and sports performance, and S&C, and all that stuff. And then, obviously, you've transitioned now out of pro sports, and obviously, the system building that you've worked in. Because for those listeners, is Jez didn't just work in the S&C world, but also in running the performance department in general, right? So running athletic training, sports science, athletic training. So the other part of that, I mean, there's so many places we could go. We could spend 4 hours on this, but I think touching base on all these different aspects. And then obviously now you've transitioned out of pro sports and what you're doing now and how you're utilizing those skills. Because one of the other things I'm getting is we've got physical therapists that work in professional baseball, professional soccer, professional basketball. And now they're coming up to me, Jez, and they're saying, hey, like a great example is people say, well, we had this conversation with somebody, right? They go, well, I'm a physical therapist, like with so-and-so team, right? I really wouldn't leave this organization unless I was like a clinical director. And they do not like my response, which is like, well, what makes you think you're qualified to be a clinical director of like a private practice? Right. Like you've never done that before. So like all of a sudden you're going to transition to like a business. Like I'm not giving you the keys to that. That makes no sense. That's bad for me. Right. So then a lot of it is also like for anybody who's listening who might be in pro sports is like, here's the thought process behind how to transition and how to create more value and how to build and, use those skills or what pieces. So again, I know I've just dumped a ton of stuff that we're going to talk about. So let's, I'll help try to drive the bus to my vision of where I want to go today with this. So we'll take there. But for the first one is, kind of give us a background on your transition, from obviously getting your PhD in sports science and what you do and the differences of S&C and sports science and going right into pro sports.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me, both of you. For it's a real honor to be here. Well, initially, I came over from the UK to go to grad school, and that was 2003. I was supposed to be here for a year to do my master's, and that's 22 years ago now. So I'm at the halfway point in my life now in the States versus the UK. So,
nice.
So yeah, got the PhD in human performance, and then really quickly got out into high performance sport because I didn't want to be an academic. So from there, sitting there in Tennessee, and I managed to get in touch with USA Rugby, and they had a big change process going on, and was fortunate to be able to meet with the new director of rugby, the strength staff, and all of their coaches, and came in and went with them for a year. Went to the World Cup in France in 2007, and working in S&C and sort of video analysis. You quickly find out that your athletes are injured all of the time. They're just not missing games, right? But they can't come in and do your perfect lift that you've planned, right? And so it's really important to understand, how do we effectively modify our training in order to keep the athlete moving forward and keep them prepared for the game, but without aggravating, maybe it's the shoulder injury that they've got. So stepped out of that, went into private practice physical therapy for a couple of years, and worked alongside some great PTs, John Kangas in particular, out here in Santa Barbara. And we developed these programs to go all the way from surgery, basically the day after, all the way through to return to performance. So that was a great process. Then from there went to NCAA. I was the head strength coach at UC Santa Barbara, and you get to put all of those learnings in place day one with 500 athletes. So that was just a fantastic experience. Probably still my favorite job. And then got a chance to go through to the pros. So went to the NBA with the Brooklyn Nets. I was the director of strength and conditioning and nutrition. Built a program there. We had a lot of success in preventing injuries, but really quickly getting into sport, you realize how fractured the organization is as it comes to caring for athletes. So you've got your medical, your athletic training, your strength and conditioning, and there's a lot of tension, a lot of friction between them, and there's a lot of territorialism. And so you're very limited in how effective you can be. Even though we had a lot of success, I just felt like there was something missing, like it could have been better. So I had started working on building out what would a whole system look like, a high performance department, and got the opportunity in the NHL to go and enact that. So I went up to the Toronto Maple Leafs, was there for 5 years, and we put that in, and really quickly, within 6 months, we had managed to eliminate injury. So we went the next 3.5 years without having a single non-contact injury, with about 100 games of NHL hockey a year. And
that's crazy.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, it hasn't been done since.
That's crazy. I know. I was gonna say that's pretty crazy. That's an awesome statistic. That's nuts.
Yeah. So like the system worked, right? The power of what we were doing, the underlying principles of what we were doing, was just so effective when you put everybody under one roof. Everybody's in one department. From there, went out to Anaheim. Michelle and I, we needed a bit more sunshine than we get in Toronto. So we were in Anaheim for a couple of years, took them through COVID, built all the communication systems to keep our players moving forward. And then this is where I met Brian, ready for another change, went over to soccer and went to NYCFC in the 2021 season. And we won MLS Cup that year. And again, built a great system and really had a healthy roster the whole year. Every player available going into MLS playoffs. And we had that run about, I think it was 9 games from the end of the season, where we went undefeated all the way through the cup. You know, won 2 playoff games on penalties, including the final. And it was just amazing. One of the craziest stats from that run, we brought one guy back, Maxi Morales, and he had these chronic calf injuries just over and over and over again. That was my day one on the job, Brian. I'm sat there and he's going absolutely nuts just about Maxi being injured again. And so we went through our process of like, okay, well, what's causing it? And we found out his big toe was locked up. And so we all went to work fixing that. And he came back. He didn't get re-injured, and then ran 17.5 kilometers in MLS Cup final and scored a penalty to help us win the cup.
Yeah.
So just mind-blowing stats.
Yeah.
Well, so I want to, so first of all, I'm sure North London for Arsenal, there's great housing up there if you guys want to move there. My team needs you sorely. About 8 hamstring injuries in like a week and a half.
Right.
So I'm really interested in that, right? Because not to kind of the story is awesome in terms of like how you basically saw a problem that honestly, if you talk to anybody who's worked in sports, they would tell you, yeah, that's a huge problem. I was up
Yeah.
here. We have it used to be Athletes Performance Exos, and I did some NFL draft stuff with them. And the PTs there, who were their off-season PTs, were saying about the in-season players, like not the draftees, but like the
Yeah.
people who are playing for the Giants or the Jets or whatever, right? They say, my God, they yell at us from the team. And I'm trying to do something, and then the trainer's mad, but he's not even a PT. But then the strength and conditioning coach has something, and I was just like, "These are millionaire calves you're dealing with. Like, how is this not better?" And that was 10, 15 years ago. So hopefully it's gotten better.
Yeah.
But I was shocked by that. I was like, "This is supposed to be the pinnacle, and how are you guys not on a group chat?" Like,
Right. Well,
Yeah.
and often, it's a big problem because those guys are often seen as a threat.
yeah,
Right?
I thought there was a
They
giant pissing
show
match.
you
That's what I
up,
thought it
or
was.
yeah, that's exactly what it is. And it's that territorialism that I encountered day one in professionals, actually earlier than that, right into NCAA. And people have these little fiefdoms within the organization, and people don't like getting shown up. People don't like getting challenged. Everybody's got their little thing. So, for a lot of people, information is currency, right? And so if you're the guy with information, everyone has to come to you, the head coach, the GM. You cement your position as sort of the important guy within that department. So as soon as information starts to get democratized, or you do something with the athlete that makes them feel better, and this other guy's been doing something else, these are all threatening because it's such an unsafe and insecure environment where you could get fired at any moment for any reason, regardless of what kind of job you're doing. And so anything becomes a threat to your job. And so that's how people start developing their mindset, is keeping their job versus becoming the best version of themselves.
Yeah.
Well,
and it makes sense. That's human nature.
Okay. Yeah. One thing that I've said, like on a regular basis too, that people don't realize, like as fans of teams, right? Now, having been in these locker rooms and done these things, right? One of the things that I've noticed in general, I remember, and Jez doesn't even know this. Sorry. I remember when I first heard about this guy who was coming. Oh, we got a new guy. This guy, Jeremy, who's coming in anyways.
Yeah.
And like, right. And the dynamic is like, how's it going to go? And I remember the first time we met, I was like, oh, this is going to be great. Like, we're going to get along.
Yeah.
Like, so, but there's a lot of concern and fear, not just people, again, for physical therapists or strength conditioning specialists listening to this, ATs, whatever. The biggest thing that I think happens is people don't communicate well. People don't get along. And again, to go back to, well, what makes, like, how do you get into pro sports? It's exactly what you were just talking about, is being part of that culture. If you can say, hey, like, I want to be, when we have this, ability to challenge one another, right? It's not a pissing contest like I was talking about. It's more of we are a collective coming together, right? No pun intended, still in the company name, but we're a collective coming together for the greater good, right? And that run of that MLS Cup showed me that, right? Because I've also watched, with NYCFC since 2021, the huge change that's occurred since I got there to now, even, right? Post you now being there. But a lot of what I've watched is just the ability for all of it to really come together, where people are okay with challenging one another, right? And if that's a problem, it's like, look, we're just trying to get people better. We're all on the same team, legitimately, right? And so I think what people don't realize in different organizations is the idea that it's not just, just like if you got a player who is rocking the culture within the locker room, you could have employees that do it too, right? So like that's a huge piece of it. So no, I've witnessed it firsthand of how it came together. And your point about someone like Maxi, who just scored a goal this weekend, who I mean, obviously he had a big injury, last year with ACL, blah blah, 2 years ago. But obviously, still, I don't think he's had a soft tissue injury like that since, and still, and even coming back from that, right? So in terms of speaking with the systems, talk a little bit about, obviously your experience with the Nets and as an S&C coach being limited with your ability to manipulate that. What were some of the major changes that you created when you got to Toronto, and you were like, hey, like, these are the things we need to do to put together and obviously create that huge system that basically got rid of non-contact injuries, which is incredible.
Yeah, it came down to number one, communication, right? it's not as sophisticated and as technologically advanced as people would think, right? The number one thing we did, everybody is going to sit in the training room every single morning and have a conversation about everybody on the roster, right? That's just number one. Everybody knows everything about the athlete. So, and the amazing amount of resistance to that. Amazing amount of
Really?
resistance. Right. That was mandatory, and literally had to walk around and find people like, no, get your ass in
Wow.
the meeting. So
Yeah.
unbelievable just to try and get that in place. The other thing was a mindset shift within the staff, right? A lot of these territories come because you have a title, a job title, and a set of responsibilities under that. I'm the head athletic trainer. I'm in charge of rehabilitation. And what we start thinking is that means I'm in charge of all of the rehabilitation process, right? I'm in charge from the day he gets hurt to the day he returns to play. So we changed the mindset from a job title to a skill set. And we put them on a curve of intensity. So soft tissue therapy, manual therapy on the table here, the physician working with them, and gradually increasing intensity all the way to return to play and playoff games and worst case scenario physiological situations. And what we understood was that as you went up that intensity chart, you had to have the self-awareness to know when it was your skill set that was primary. And we're all very good. So we all can do some stuff to the left and the right of us. But at some point, the guy next to you is better at it, right? At some point, as an athletic trainer, as a physio, you've got to hand off to the next person. AT to physio, physio to strength coach to on-field coach. Because we've got to have the complete spectrum and expose the athlete, because we lose sight of what we're rehabbing them for. There's a mindset in sport, and now I'm out of sport, exact same thing. Basically, did it stop hurting? Right? Has it physiologically healed? Okay, return. Without bringing them back to the demands. That's why we saw such an epidemic of re-injuries, because we weren't preparing them to get back to performance. And so that was a mindset shift in what's your skill set, know what your skill set is, and be humble enough to know when the guy next to you needs to take over. So,
I think that's interesting too, Jeremy, because when I'm thinking about it, and especially on this podcast, we talk to small business owners, right? And this is something that, man, wouldn't it be great if the local high school kids had this? Wouldn't it be great
Absolutely.
if all this stuff happened?
And Jez,
right?
I can even touch base on that, because I think we were talking about this, dude, when we first met, right? That I took it over with the local high school, and how much resistance I still get to stay at a high school.
Dude.
I was like, you don't even fucking know what we do in pro sports and local high schools. We are trying to do that, and local high schools, the bureaucracy and the pushing, it's crazy. It's crazy, right? But it's true. And we have with even our own ATs, our own people who work again, and we're all working for the same organization. That's what's so crazy, is that we're all working. And that was actually one of the things I think Ronnie did a really good job of when we were in 2021 was I remember sitting in that meet. So this actually, before you got there, I remember we sat in a meeting. It's the only meeting I've ever been in where he, down to the chefs in the kitchen, he's going to every single person, how are you going to help us win? How are you going to help us win? And I remember like the power of that, walking around being like, I get what he's doing here. He's just showing all of us like we're all on the same team, right?
And we're all contributing.
The humbleness needs to be, exactly.
Right? Yeah, I'm not the only one.
So I totally agree with you.
The next mindset comes around, we can prevent injuries, right? They're just labeled as this thing that happens in sport, and we rehab them. So when we got there, we sat down and we did this big project to build our rehab programs, right? Because that's what you do. Guys get hurt, you rehab them. And they were beautiful, great, systematic return to play, very objective. How do we move from one phase to the next? And we had all these return to play criteria. And the first one we were going to target was groin injuries. So we're sitting there, we're in the conference room, we've got all our charts up on the board, and we're talking about these return to play criteria. How do we know they're safe to return to play? And I'm sat there, I'm thinking, oh, hang on, how many of our healthy athletes could pass these return to play criteria? And that was a paradigm shifting moment for me. So
Yeah.
when the guys came into camp, we tested them on all of these risk criteria that we knew were a risk of groin injury. About 50% of the squad couldn't pass the test.
Yeah.
So if they had been injured, we wouldn't have let them go back on the ice. But because they weren't, they were going to practice and play and train every minute. They wouldn't be on the table. They wouldn't be getting treatments. They wouldn't be doing all of this stuff that we would be doing with an injured athlete. But they were ticking time bombs. So what that allowed us to do was essentially move the rehab program from after the injury to before the injury. So each guy had their own injury risk profile, and each injury risk factor was associated. Maybe it was the strength coach, maybe it was the athletic trainer, maybe it was the osteopath or the physical therapist, maybe it was a load management issue. But what we knew was that if we put together an individualized program on and training them away from their individual risk factor, we knew that we would create a safe environment for them to express peak performance. What we then knew is that we were going to be playing a lot of hockey. And so we had to retest them on a regular cadence in order to make sure they weren't dropping into risk and the guys that were at risk were coming out. And that allowed us to pull all the levers behind the scenes to modulate the risk of injury without impacting hockey. Because that's the other thing in sport. What the first thing we want to do is shut them down, right? This was a hockey club, not a sports science club. And so we moved behind the scenes to keep the athletes available for the coach. That's what coaches want. And it's why sports science gets such a hard time and gets rejected by coaches. Because the minute the guy walks in with his laptop, like, okay, well, who's not practicing today? And the guy's got to change his whole practice plan. He's got to change his whole plan preparation for the game. And so it was such an important mindset for us. First of all, the Navy SEALs call it left of bang, right? Don't get blown up in the first place.
Right? Exactly.
Right. So how do we move it over here and work on prevention? How do we work without impacting the sport, right? And how do we communicate at the different levels from the GM, the coach, the athlete, and then the staff? So all of that system that has to be in action on a day-to-day basis, taking into account the travel schedule, the playing schedule, the practice schedule, like how are we feeding them, fueling them, how are we sleeping? All right. So it's an immensely complex, but actually quite simple process when you just strip it down to those sort of first order principles.
Now, do you think this is something that, like, because I mean, again, with all the resources, well, I would assume all the resources in the world, we all know there's some owners out there that don't want to spend a penny, but having that and having you come in, especially with that proven track record, now, right? It's kind of, it would be crazy if we put on the front of this podcast, we can prevent all injuries, right? And that would a million clicks, right? But the reality is that there's a lot of resources in those sports teams. So I guess my question to you, for a listener trying to build out a business now, is like, how do I recreate that? Right?
Yeah.
I'm your local PT. I got a table in the back of my car and maybe $100 to spend on advertising each month, right? So how do I do this, right? Because that's what I want to know, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's do this real quick, because I don't want to I want to make one comment before we transition, because I think there's a piece that Jeremy just talked about there in that whole piece that I thought was like so crucial. Because I feel so many physical therapists that are listening to this, and I'm gonna shit on sports residencies for a second, and I hate that. But it's the whole idea behind sports residency is a lot of the science and the rehabilitation, and there's a thought process to go from school, right, run a sports residency, and then to go right into pro sports. And it's a pipeline, because you can hire out.
Yeah.
Why? Because we can do VALD testing. They know how to do everything from force plates to handheld dynamometers. They understand the tech. And they understand the integration and the rehab perspective. But I think, Jez, what you just pointed out, which is what I find with a lot of people, and again, it's funny because Dave just did a great call, and I know you're friends with Dave Horath, who's now the current person in your position at NYCFC. He did a talk for us on counter movement jumps with the VALD plates, the force plates, and his research, and it was awesome. But one thing that you just said that I think that gets lost is the idea of Well, we created systems that basically said, here are these different injuries. So take groin injuries, right? And you could do this with, soft tissue injuries. You could do this with ACL prevention. So many people talk ACL prevention, right? And basically what you do is you say, all right, here's the injuries. Here are the criteria that we need to meet to not get that injury or to increase the likelihood that we don't have an injury for this particular problem, right? Whatever that is. Then we measure our athletes, and then we do and implement the programs to meet those criteria. That's the system, right? Pretty simple. And so to your point, how many people learn that fucking stuff and actually do it, right? Like that's the stuff that I think I found was there's a disconnect there. And the reality is, I think you broke it down perfectly simple. Now, I want to move to Owen's thing is, how do you that, because now, you've now started the Vitality Collective, and I know you're doing this, but I love how Owen transitioned it is, how did you take what you've done for so many years successfully in pro sports and then bring it, and then did it in a budget-friendly way, right? Like, how did you build it privately?
Yeah, mate, it's, again, just to comment on that was the shift, right? It was reactive to proactive, and we're still being taught reactive medicine, right? We're still being taught reactive care, right? When the injury happens, how do we effectively rehab it? That's what we do as a physio and all these things, but just move all of it before the injury and you're solid, right? And these injury risk factors are all well documented. At NCAA, we talk about ACL injury prevention. We talk about injury risk with female athletes. We didn't have a single ACL tear in our female athletes, or anyone else for that matter, the entire time I was at UCSB, right? All of this stuff can be trained for and worked around, right? All of this stuff can be built into the athlete. So there's no need for all of these major surgeries. We didn't have a single major surgery in 3 years with 500 athletes. So it's not inevitable if you're thinking about it from a perspective of putting the rehab before you actually put anything else in place.
So I think the one thing I would say, I don't mean to cut you off, right? But also the resistance, I feel like and I know right now your business is not 50, 60, 100 people. So I think what I'd also love to talk about is also, now to add the caveat, the systems you've built, what you're creating, what you're doing, and now how you plan to scale it too as you grow and as you build it. Because I think one of the things that's also difficult is the aspect of like, how do I keep everybody on the same page and swimming in the same direction, rowing in the same direction, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the challenge. Now, think about how we build these things in sport, right? It's just a collection of different practitioners, right? If as a PT, you don't know a great local trainer or a great local strength coach or a great local massage therapist, a great local physician, right? You can build your team, right? You just have to create relationships and have a group who are like-minded. Now, the problem is, like, that same mindset we had in sport is very, very present and very entrenched in the real world, right? In general healthcare, not only is it an entrenched mindset, it's like $1 trillion industry. So the financial incentives are all leaning to reactive care, right? The fact that women can't get a DEXA scan on their insurance until they're 65, it should be a crime, right? That bone loss starts in their 40s, right? So now we talk about risk factors. Okay, hip fracture is one of the most deadly injuries you can sustain, and yet we're going to let that progress for 25 years before we even measure it. Right? We can prevent this. We know what the risk factors are. Right. So I think that number one, it's a mindset again, keeping everyone on the right page. First, you got to find the people who are on the same page. Find people who understand that you as a physical therapist are not a threat to them as a strength coach. Right. Find a physician who wants to work as a part of the team, not be the team. Right. This is the other problem, is that the medical system, it's medical care, it's not health care, because the physicians are taught that you can dismiss basically anyone who's not an MD, right? You overrule anyone for basically any factor. Doesn't matter if you're trained in it or not. So you've got to find the people who fit a system. And when you do, you create a system around that group of communication. A little more tricky when you're not all in the same training room. But you just have to build that referral system and find a way to monetize it. Right. So that's challenge, because if you know that when it is your job and when it's not your job, right, a lot of the people that come to you, it's not your time to work with them, to be optimal. So how do you create a system where, you take people in and then refer them straight out? You never get paid for that. That's great. You've got the person at the center, but now you've got to eat, right? This isn't everybody getting paid and we're just referring people around. So I think we have to resist that impulse to, okay, well, I get paid for this segment. I'll keep them as long as possible, right? Sure. Because we aren't all skilled. I am not a physical therapist, right? It is a disservice to that person if they are not seeing the physical therapist.
Yeah. Well,
so it's that same principle.
And I think, so I'm thinking about this, right? And I'm trying to game plan it because I'm at a different stage that Brian is, right? And that's kind of, with our podcast, that's always kind of the back and forth is he's got 5 clinics. I just started out of the back of my car, right? And I'm thinking, okay, I'm very much in that, like, you got to pay the bills standpoint that you were just talking about, right? But I'm thinking, man, I could even do something like this. And I'm starting to do it with golfers where we work with swing coaches. Right. And you aren't as intense in strength and conditioning in golf as you might be in soccer or hockey, but it's still there. A lot of the really, big golfer or very avid golfers want this. And it does kind of suck. You have to say, look, I can't fix this because I'm not the best one at it. This guy can, but you do eventually get really good traction because they'll send you back people and it'll eventually become what we talk a lot about, referral networks. And then I'm thinking, Brian, this would be something that more on your scale where you could put all this in house, right? Where you could say like, okay, we hire a strength and conditioning PhD who runs our program for this. And every morning we all show up at 8:05 and we sit in the conference room and talk about our patients for the day. So it's not an unachievable goal, but you're right, man. The incentives are completely, I'm sitting there. I'm like, yeah, I'd love to do this, but I could also get 3 more sessions out of them if I am also the massage therapist.
And that's something I was going to touch on with when Jess said that, because I think one of the things that also is a huge piece when you're creating the referral systems is having that great communication. Also could be this connection of like, say I'm referring someone to Jeremy, right? And I'm like, hey, I got this kid, he's a college level athlete or even a weekend warrior, right? He's a triathlete and needs to do some S&C work. I might make that referral a little bit sooner and just hold on to him and be like, hey, I'm going to see him too, but I'm also then going to have you work with Jeremy, and eventually it's going to bleed, but it's also going to like transition out. And so what it does is, like, I think there's still got to be that humility that you're talking about, and also financial and like the responsibility to clients, right? Like, I'm not going to hold on to them forever. But I think that's the thing that doesn't happen is the fear of like stealing clients, when the reality is it can be much more collaborative and being like, I do that with gym owners all the time. And one of the things that I got as a feedback when I was in Owen's position when we were building was a lot of gym owners said to me, they go, we like the fact that you don't say, hey, you got to stop going to the gym. Because I'm like, well, exactly. And again, like, and all it comes down to is evaluating each person individually, right? Like, I had an athlete who had a mobility problem. I was like, just because you have mobility problems that set you up for injury doesn't mean that you have to stop going to the gym. In fact, you shouldn't stop. You should keep working out with them. However, you should see me once or twice a week to prevent injury here, right? And just in the mobility aspect, and maybe my skill set's a little more fine-tuned, right? In that process. And so then you create this kind of, again, like, I love the way I understand now. Actually, I have a much better understanding of the Vitality Collective. It's much more of a collective, to your point, right?
It is a collective, right?
And it's a collective. It makes no sense. And
I think again apologize for screwing up the name. Okay,
let's just keep driving that home, Jess. Let's keep driving that home, right? That way.
Yeah.
So exactly. I think the other part that becomes a challenge, honestly, that's the hardest part, and I've watched it actually a few times, particularly when you go to cash-based thing, because I think this gets easier when you're in the insurance game, right? Because now I have insurance, so I can be like, hey, you can keep seeing me through your insurance, and you can go see Jeremy, right? And then all of a sudden it becomes a little bit less of a financial burden in a lot of that
Right.
scenario. But I think the challenge what Owen talked about is yes, then you do begin to bring it in house because naturally the communication just gets so much better. By the way,
Yeah.
again, going back to the aspect in pro sports, you still have the same issue that creates this pissing contest of, well, so and so has
Absolutely.
referred to me, and so that. So that's what actually happens in house. But inherently, the other problem is because you do things in house, your outside referral sources tighten up because what happens is they're also nervous that, well, why would I refer an S&C or physical therapy client to you when I know you got your own S&C people and like might take them away from me? And like
Yeah.
that's very possible. That does happen, right?
Yeah.
And for me to sit here and say, "Oh, I would never do that." I mean, it's impossible, right? It just because
Yeah.
we've had it with clients where they were just like, "What I want to work on, you guys specialize more specifically than my guy does," and it's like,
Mhm.
and like I hear them, right, or like vice
Yeah.
versa, right? They may have something different, or so it might be somebody who's got something in hockey and they specialize. Now they got all these hockey people. So now I'm
Yeah.
like, well, I don't really want to refer to them. No, I'm going to lose the athlete, right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing that happens when you get to that size. That's a challenge. And so as
Yeah.
a business owner, what I've recognized is bringing it more under one roof just optimizes communication if done better. That's the one nice thing about it. However,
Yeah.
the con is that it alienates your people that really helped you get to where you are. That's the part that sucks. That's the hardest part by far.
Yeah, and I think that's a communication piece on your stage of development, right?
Yes.
That is a natural progression, and it's where it has to go because it's better for your clients. Um, that's that awkward, messy middle of change, right? Like you're just going to have that difficult conversation at some point where, look,
Yeah.
this is the direction we've got to go. It doesn't eliminate totally because you're going to have that specialist referral at some point. I think the very best people usually don't come in and work for someone, right? Like they'll
Yeah.
develop their skill set to a point, and then to your point, Brian, they'll want to get out of sport and be a clinic director or go and set up on their own. And you
Yep.
know that they've got that elite skill set. And I think maintaining the relationship is important. But people understand more and more once they start running their own business, as I did.
For
Talk about not being
sure.
qualified, right? You come out and you're like, oh yeah, no, I totally get why that guy's doing that, right? So
Yep.
it's a tough part of scaling your business is that of course at some point it's going to come under one roof because it's better for your business. You keep revenue in house, you keep communication in house. But the important piece, Brian, to your point in sport, that there is still tension. That's where you need the performance director role. And similarly, in
Yes.
once you start bringing people, or somebody in that broad network has to play the coordinator role so that it doesn't naturally just develop into silos, not necessarily through ill intent, but just because people are busy, they're running their own businesses. Somebody's got to
Totally.
keep up with where we're at every stage. And that's not a practitioner now. Like, so that's where my role will be to back out of a lot of the day-to-day to oversee our clients' progress through the system versus being in the trenches with everyone. And so I think having someone in that role where you can make sure people are getting what they need and when they need it, that's very important. Making sure that somebody's not over here on an island, not getting any referrals. It's not about the referral, it's about the athlete needs it or the client needs it.
Exactly.
And so just
Well, I
making
Well
sure
said.
that they're getting it.
I think that's a
Well
great
said.
business model. And again, maybe again, I'm off. You guys know each other way better than I know you, Jess. But just to be the guy who says, okay, patient A, you want to play, you know, beer league softball, right? Probably not beer
Hmm.
league, but you know what I mean. The weekend
Sure.
warrior, but really intense weekend warrior.
Hmm.
I will be your, for lack of a better term, concierge
Yeah.
for your performance process. And then that way you can kind of say, okay, this is a good, like, say, my world's golf. So let's say a good golfer, right? You can say,
Hmm.
this is a great instructor. This is a great physio. This is a great strength and conditioning for golf. these are the 3 that I recommend,
Mm.
and I'll make sure that I text them every freaking day for an update. And then you
Yeah.
call and they know you and say,
Mhm.
okay, well, dude, this guy gives me like so much business. I'm absolutely going to return his text messages,
Exactly.
right? And the patient's expecting that. I mean, that's a great model
Yeah.
that I think would be taken up a lot, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, it's a difficult
Yeah.
model, Owen. It's not a linear business. Like if I wanted to start a personal training business, we would have been up and running with a shingle on the wall in minutes.
Okay.
This is a very non-intuitive. Like people don't know that that's a thing, and they don't know they need it. Right. So
Okay.
it's a new category of healthcare out here. This high performance healthcare where you are thinking about it not in the silo of medicine or physical therapy. Or, well, I'm not hurt. I don't need this. So
Mhm.
now we're starting to zoom out. None of it's under insurance right now. So
Mhm.
that now your client base shrinks.
Yeah.
And so now you're coordinating, but it's a slower build, right? A much slower
Yeah.
build because it's not intuitive to people. So you've got to look for people who are already looking for that thing.
Well, and
Yeah.
I think one of the things, and it's funny because I'm actually listening to it as you're talking. I think one of the challenges is that the reactive healthcare model in that
Mhm.
scenario, which I love the way you're talking about that, like reactive versus proactive. The reactive healthcare model, the person who's the performance director in that scenario is the patient, right? In theory.
Correct.
In theory, I'm
Correct.
the patient saying, "Hey, I think I need S&C work. Hey, I think I need, I need physical therapy, or maybe I need to see a chiropractor." Maybe right. They're just trying
Mhm.
to figure it out. And what's crazy in that scenario, at this reactive, is they most of what happens is I go to see a physician and they tell me what I need, and that's
Yeah.
the dynamic, right? Where in
Yeah.
reality, like you and I both know this, I've seen it in professional sports where you know there's different ways that people are in that system from an orthopedic. And
Yeah.
again, this is not me talking shit. It's just the reality of what happens is
Right.
a lot of physicians may not necessarily get the right order of operations, right? Or maybe aren't
Correct.
equipped to do that. And so the aspect of I love the idea of like, hey, I go to this place to go see
Yeah.
them because I know that they're going to tell me exactly what I need to do, and I'm going to have a bunch of different systems that are all in place that are all more importantly going to communicate with one another because
Yeah.
that's every physical therapist has treated the client right. And I'm sure all you guys have done this as well. That's treated the client that's come in and been like, hey, let's get the massage therapist involved, let's get the we'll do some S&C stuff, I'll do this, we'll get everybody. And then your first reaction is probably like, oh fuck, because now I gotta like juggle a bunch of people I don't
Yeah.
know, right?
Yeah.
And now I gotta figure out my scenario. And I think the first reality of a mentality you need to set if you're in that thought process is, all right, take a step back, this is what this client wants to do. And then I'll say to him, I'll go, no problem. Let's get him involved. But let me know who you're seeing so I can talk with them. So that way we can make sure this all flows
Correct.
properly. We're all in all right, you know,
Yeah.
lane, if you will. And not even the lanes can't bleed, but that we're all making sure that we're not being counterintuitive to one another, that we're all making sure they're
Right.
working together. And I've heard so many people, they get nervous in that scenario and bail, right? Which
Mhm.
is not a good teammate. Or people get in that scenario and they try and like muscle everybody out. To your point about like, well, I do this better
Right.
than you, and blah blah blah. When in
Right.
reality, it's got to be checking egos and bringing it all together, right?
Yeah.
That's the challenge in a lot of these scenarios,
Yeah.
whether they're in
Well,
house or not. Quite frankly,
yeah, and seeing the value of the other practitioners. You know, a lot of
yes,
clients we've sort of had to spend the first year really unwinding a lot of this medical approach, right? Guy that's had a hamstring injury for 8 months, right? And it's just not getting better. So he's had this injection and that injection. He's getting this massage, and it's all modality based. Like, dude, save your money and do some hamstring curls, right? If we
yeah,
get that thing
exactly.
strong,
Some
and which is
vertical,
what we did, we just got him strong, and all of that went away, and he's back heli skiing. He's in his 70s,
yes, it's awesome.
right? It's knowing, it's purposeful training, right? We are training towards a goal. We're not just working out. And so if we work towards the goal, we know the demands of the goal, let's train for it, right? The physiological healing of the hamstring will only help so much. Then we have to train it for those demands so that it stops hurting, right? When you do sport, because too often it's Okay, well, then I guess you need some stem cells. Okay, well, I guess you need a PRP shot. Okay, well, I guess you need a surgery. Oh, that didn't work. I guess we need another surgery, right? And your world just shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and shrinks because you have to keep backing out of activity. So now if we look at that intensity spectrum, you're doing all your work down at this bottom end. Well, of course you're still in pain. Had this conversation with a 16-year-old dancer on Friday, right? The doc's, she's 3 months out. She's been cleared for ballet from they fixed a subluxation of patella. Basically just sat on her ass for 3 months. And the doc's like, yep, good to go.
Healed. You hear it all the time. All the time.
Right. And she's like, well, it's still hurting. Oh, okay. Well, sit around for another 3 months. And if it's still hurting, we'll do another surgery. And then your ballet career's over. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, no.
and Jez, and I know we got to land this plane and be respectful of everybody's time at some point because we could talk for the next 3 hours on this stuff. But you also know this happens at the pro level, right? Like, I remember in 2021, I'll keep it all unnamed, but we had it happen where a doc cleared somebody earlier than we all had talked about, and then it went back to what I do love that happens, and maybe something we can talk about in the future. But it's like then there's again to reverse engineer it from a return to play perspective. It's hey, these objective testing that we have for these different injuries, we haven't met that criteria yet. So because we haven't met that criteria, that's why they can't go back. So to your point about rest, we're laughing because we're listening saying, oh, there's no way they're going to make that criteria. But what really is important is what are those objective findings that allows that return to sport? That's what makes return to sport so, uniquely challenging. Yeah. But also very simple. What makes it very simple is let's come up with a bunch of tests that we have. And we started implementing this in evolution. And quite frankly, some of the resistance we've had in the company that's been super challenging is from within is just to refer into the program. But like, hey, there's force plate testing, there's Y balance testing, there's different jump testing, there's different thought process for Tyndek and dynamometer testing. And we look at all these tests, and as long as you're good with symmetry or whatever our categories are in each one of these in normalization, then they can go back to sport. It's that simple. And just referring into that program, we just don't have nearly the volume we should, right? Because so to your point about that performance director, that's that person being like, guys, we got to do this, and here's why and how that builds. So no, I think what you're doing and how you're building it's
on intake, right? On intake, they actually meet with the performance director, right? And we talk them through this whole program, and this will be available to you, right? And then we start their rehab process, and make it available to your general training clients, right? Let's stay on top of these metrics. I think, it's very important to understand that this isn't intuitive and that this is going to be an education process. That's the big challenge here. But this is prevalent throughout sports still. It's the mindset we had to change.
Yeah.
We had to get people out of that territorial reactive mindset.
Well, Jez, you are fighting the good fight, man. I mean, it's amazing from the outside. You think all this stuff is just figured out by all the smart people in the room, but it's kind of eye-opening to see that not just at a professional level, but I think what all of us know is even at the local level, this is something that the basics are hard. Right. The communication is hard. And I honestly, man, I love what you're doing. If you're going to be in Phoenix, by all means, give me a call. I'd love to be part of that team. You're off-season athletes, I'm down the road. But yeah, man, no, I've had a great time chatting with you. I know Brian has as well. And thanks for coming on.
Oh, thank you. And I want to challenge you on one thing, Owen. They're not the basics. They're not the basics. They're the most important things you can possibly do for your health and longevity. And we call them the basics. And people are like, oh, well, let's move past those then. They're just basics. No,
so true.
Rebrand. Right? It's like the people who marketed milk, right? We're going to call this full fat milk, not 97% fat free.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Do these essential components of your health and you will be fine. Don't worry about these little 1%ers that are up at the top.
There you go. All right, Jess. So where can people find you before we cut out? It's Vitality Collective.
Yeah, Instagram is Vitality Collective Performance. So you're almost there, Ron.
There you go. Now he finds out. We threw him the bone there at the end.
we have the Vitality Collective podcast, where we interview a lot of my network from professional sport. So that's been great deep dives into all of these real essentials of vitality. We're on LinkedIn at Vitality Collective, and our website is www.vitality-collective.com.
/performance. No, I'm just kidding. All right.
We'll put those all in the show notes too.
Yeah,
the
we will.
performance. Correct.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much. We are out.
All right. Thanks guys.
All right. See ya.